Eric Gary. Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Guatemala, General Eugenio Laugerud.
News and Special Events Departments of the Mutual Broadcasting System present the signing of the Panama Canal Treaties. This is Dick Rossay from the Pan American Union Building in Washington, where in a matter of moments, 13 years of negotiations will culminate with new agreements to end, by the year 2000, U.S. control of the Panama Canal. The ceremony has actually begun with opening remarks from Ambassador Alejandra Orfilla, who is Secretary General of the Organization of American States. The Pan American Union Building serves as the OAS headquarters in Washington. And the ambassador right now is running down the list of luminaries, dignitaries, chiefs of state, 27 of which I hear this evening, most of whom with their wives. And the setting is the resplendent Hall of Nations, the third floor of the Pan American Union Building.
Cornelio Hugh, Your Excellency, the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and Worship of Haiti, Dr. Edna Brutus, Your Excellency, the Secretary...
Following Ambassador Orfilla's introduction of all the heads of state, he will introduce President Carter, who then will be followed by the Chief of Government of the Republic of Panama, General Omar Torrijos, and then comes, of course, the climactic moment, the signing of the canal agreements. We'll go back to the podium now as Ambassador Orfilla continues running the list of heads of state who are here this evening.
The President of the United States of America, Mr. Jimmy Carter. The head of the government of the Republic of Panama, General Omar Torrijos.
Warm ovations for the two dignitaries who will actually sign the agreements this evening, President Carter and General Torrijos.
Excelentísimos señores jefes de
Your
Estado,
Excellencies, Chiefs of State, Chiefs of Government, distinguished representatives of the American republics, ladies and gentlemen, recognizing that we are present at a moment of history, I welcome the Chiefs of State and heads of government of the republics of the Americas to the Organization of American States, to this house, which is their home. In doing so, I am complying with the wishes of the head of government of Panama, General Omar Torrijos Herrera, and of the President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, who today, before their peers from the rest of the hemisphere, are culminating a process in which none negotiated in fear and none feared to negotiate. They and the governments they represent are adding here a new page to the grandeur of the Americas. In welcoming you here, I join with all the peoples of the hemisphere who have been waiting tirelessly, with patience and with faith for this moment. Through their leaders, they were witnesses to the negotiations. They are the principal actors in this ceremony. Let me pay special tribute to the people of Panama, who waited with dignity and who negotiated with honor, and to the people of the United States who, in accordance with their own tradition, have brought even greater honor upon their own flag by respecting the flag of others. Let me extend this tribute to the leaders of both nations, to their Minister of Foreign Affairs and Secretary of State, their diplomats, their technical experts and negotiators whose vigilance, hard work, and high purpose made this signing possible. The agreements now reached by the governments of Panama and the United States mean the beginning of a new era in inter-American relations. An era of true interdependence in which there will be no exception to the reality of the juridical equality between states, in which the sole ruling force will be the force of law, and in which no circumstances can justify any lessening of respect for the individual. We believe that peoples, like men, hold each other inviolable, and for this reason we prefer dialogue rather than isolation, negotiation rather than confrontation, equality rather than privilege, and peace rather than war. Inter-American problems are difficult and complex ones, but they can be overcome if we decide that our analysis and discussions will be backed by a sincere resolve to find a just solution. 1 year ago, in addressing the 6th regular session of the General Assembly of the OAS, I observed that Pan American Day will take on its full meaning when, for example, through negotiation and with due respect for the rights of all concerned, the Panama Canal is fully in Panamanian hands. The Malvinas are once more Argentine territory. A solution is found for the problem posed by Bolivia's landlocked situation. The question of Belize is resolved to the satisfaction of the interested parties, and fully satisfactory agreements are reached between El Salvador and Honduras. Today we have completed the first stage in the search for this ideal. Your presence here before the eyes of the Americas and the whole world is testimony to its significance. We cannot evade the expectations of our peoples. We have an inescapable responsibility to history to complete the stages that still remain. Therefore, the signing of the treaties on the Panama Canal and the Declaration of Washington, by means of which the representatives of the American republics have recorded their profound satisfaction with this event, do more than merely close a chapter of our history. They promise us a future built in that spirit. The difficulties put upon us by realities end when we decide that we shall overcome them. May God and the creative will of the Americas so ordain.
Introductory remarks from Ambassador Alejandro Orfilla, who is Secretary General of the Organization of American States, hosting this evening's treaty signing. On the dais, directly to Mr. Orfilla's right, is President Carter. Ambassador Orfilla is continuing with an introduction and a handshake. President Carter, who remains seated, he will deliver his remarks sitting down.
Secretary General and distinguished leaders from throughout our own country and from throughout this hemisphere. First of all, I want to express my deep thanks to the leaders who come here from 27 nations in our own hemisphere, 20 heads of state for this historic occasion. I'm proud to be here as part of the largest group of heads of state ever assembled in the Hall of the Americas, Mr. Secretary General. We are here to participate in the signing of treaties which will assure a peaceful and prosperous and secure future for an international waterway of great importance to us all. But the treaties do more than that. They mark the commitment of the United States to the belief that fairness and not force should lie at the heart of our dealings with the nations of the world. If any agreement between two nations is to last, it must serve the best interest of both nations. The new treaties do that, and by guaranteeing the neutrality of the Panama Canal, the treaties also serve the best interest of every nation that uses the canal. This agreement thus forms a new partnership to ensure that this vital waterway, so important to all of us, will continue to be well operated, safe, and open to shipping by all nations now and in the future. Under these accords, Panama will play an increasingly important role in the operation and defense of the canal during the next 23 years. And after that, the United States will still be able to counter any threat to the canal's neutrality and openness for use. The members of the Organization of American States and all the members of the United Nations will have a chance to subscribe to the permanent neutrality of the canal. The accords also give Panama an important economic stake in the continued safe and efficient operation of the canal, and make Panama a strong and interested party in the future success of the waterway. in the spirit of reciprocity suggested by the leaders at the Bogota summit, the United States and Panama have agreed that any future sea-level canal will be built in Panama and with the cooperation of the United States. In this manner, the best interests of both our nations are linked and preserved into the future. Many of you seated at this table have made known for years, through the Organization of American States and through your own personal expressions of concern to my predecessors in the White House, your own strong feelings about the Panama Canal Treaty of 1903. That treaty, drafted in a world so different from ours today, has become an obstacle to better relations with Latin America. I thank each of you for the support and help that you and your countries have given during the long process of negotiation, which is now drawing to a close. This agreement has been negotiated over a period of 14 years under 4 presidents of the United States. I'm proud to see President Ford here with us tonight. And I'm also glad to see Mrs. Lyndon Johnson here with us tonight. Many secretaries of state have been involved in the negotiations. Dean Rusk can't be here. He's endorsed the treaty. But Secretary of State William Rogers is here. We're glad to have you, sir. And Secretary of State Henry Kissinger is here. This has been a bipartisan effort, and it's extremely important for our country to stay unified in our commitment to the fairness, the symbol of equality, the mutual respect, the preservation of the security and defense of our own nation, and an exhibition of cooperation which sets a symbol that is important to us all before this assembly tonight and before the American people in the future. This opens a new chapter in our relations with all nations of this hemisphere, and it testifies to the maturity and the good judgment and the decency of our people. This agreement is a symbol for the world of the mutual respect and cooperation among all our nations. Thank you very much for your help.
A very proud and a very exuberant President Jimmy Carter, with brief remarks prior to signing the Panama Canal agreements, pointing out very emphatically that these agreements have bipartisan support, singling out the fact that former President Gerald Ford is here, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, an array of former and present government leaders.
His Excellency.
And now the Secretary General of the OAS, Ambassador Orfia, is about to introduce General de Rios of Panama.
Mr. President of the United States, I quote from the January 20, 1904 letter from United States Secretary of State John Hay to Secretary Spooner. You and I know too well how many points there are in this treaty to which a Panamanian patriot could object. End of quote. My presence here, together with that of the most representative leaders and statesmen of the hemisphere, emphasizes the goal of many struggles by various generations of Panamanian patriots.
Nuestro pueblo
Our people,
ha luchado con tenacidad
who have striven with heroic tenacity to perfect their
no
independence,
tiene ninguna vocación de rencor,
hold no feelings of rancor towards this nation, which, in a giant technological feat, carved the heartland of the Isthmus of Panama and spanned 2 oceans, shortening their distance to 8 hours' time. However, what was a technological conquest for mankind became a colonial conquest of our country through the distortion of history. And I say distortion of history because President Theodore Roosevelt himself declared publicly in Panama on October 19, 1904, and I quote, Mr. President Amador Guerrero, we have not the slightest intention to establish an independent colony in the territory of the Panama Canal Zone. End of quote. Deep within them, what nourished the hopes of Panamanians and fortified their patience throughout these many years was the firm conviction that the North American people have no colonialist ambitions. For you were once a colony and fought heroically for your liberation. We feel, President Carter, that by raising morality as a banner in our relations, you are representing the true spirit of your people. Latin America has supported us faithfully and unselfishly. Its leaders are present at this ceremony to bear witness that the faith and cause of the people of Panama are the faith and the cause of the hemisphere. The presence of these chief executives should launch a new and different era among those of us who live and dwell together in the Western Hemisphere, so that all the remnants of injustice that stand in the way of our being treated as equals will disappear. For being strong carries with it the commitment to be fair. And you have turned imperial force into moral force. Esteemed President Carter, there are 2 kinds of truth. The plain truth and the pleasant truth. On behalf of plain truth, I want to say to you that this treaty that we will sign shortly, and which terminates the one which no Panamanian ever signed, does not have the total support of our people, because the 23 years agreed upon as a transition period means 8,395 days, during which time United States military bases will remain, turning my country into a possible strategic target for reprisal. Also, we have agreed upon a neutrality treaty that places us under the Pentagon's defense umbrella, a treaty which, if not administered judiciously by future generations, could become an instrument of permanent intervention. Nevertheless, what has been agreed upon is the result of an understanding between 2 leaders who believe in the peaceful togetherness of their peoples and who have the courage and the leadership to face their peoples with no weapons other than the truth and their deep conviction of what is fair. A plebiscite will be the method of ratification in Panama. More than a plebiscite, it will be the purest civic exercise in the political history of the Republic. Ratification in this country will depend on congressional consensus. My dear friends in the Senate, in bidding farewell, I remind you of the thought of a great man, which is more valid today than ever before. It was Abraham Lincoln who said, and I quote, "A statesman thinks of the future generations, while a politician thinks of the coming elections." I return to my country convinced that the future of our relations rests in the hands of excellent statesmen. Thank you very much.
Remarks by the leader of Panama, General Omar Torrijos. responding to remarks made earlier by President Carter, and not entirely in full support of the treaties, which will be signed tonight. The general reminded everyone that the canal will remain under U.S. control for the next 23 years, and he expressed a special concern that his country will be vulnerable and could be a target of nuclear attack. Now the signing ceremony itself. President Carter first, remaining at his seat on the dais. The treaty is, actually it's plural. He signed the first one in a very handsome folder. Now he's putting his signature to the second. Complete silence in this magnificent hall of nations. Now an aide is removing the folders, passing them behind Ambassador Orfia over to General Torrijos, who is putting his signature to them. The two gentlemen obviously knew what they were signing. They didn't have to read the fine print. These negotiations have been going on now for 13 years. And actually, they were a fait accompli as early as last month. However, there were technical problems in translation. It took until just past a couple of days before everything was in order. More folders are opened. More signatures are affixed. A very historical, very dramatic moment in history. Smiles, handshakes, and applause. The principals, two gentlemen who spoke, are now standing, shaking hands, and General Torrijos and President Carter are embracing warmly. Broad smiles for both gentlemen. Remaining standing and accepting graciously the applause of the 500 or 700 people who are gathered here. Members of Congress, former Secretaries of State, one former President, Gerald Ford. Lyndon Johnson would have been here, of course. He was represented by Lady Bird, most fittingly. It was under President Johnson that these treaty negotiations began. Now, President Carter is shaking hands with the other guests on the dais. Officials whom we identified before the proceedings began were former Vice President Rockefeller, former Secretary of State Kissinger, of course, former President Ford, and a plethora of Republicans and Democrats. President Carter's effort to secure as much bipartisan support as possible prior to that fateful day, probably sometime in January, when the Senate must decide whether or not to ratify these treaties. Without the ratification, the treaties are simply pieces of paper, and such a result could be devastating to President Carter, who has put his considerable prestige on the line with the Panama Canal agreements. The main thrust of the agreements is to give Panama full sovereignty over the canal. But as General Torrijos noted, with some wryness, it won't be until for another 23 years. And we will graciously bow out of our control of the canal zone at noon Panama time on December 31st of the year 1999. Until then, we'll continue to operate the canal, and we'll maintain for the time being the 14 U.S. military bases in the zone. Now, there's a great deal at stake here this evening. Of course, it's all, everyone is extremely gratified, pleased, and it is a splendid show. But beneath all of the glitter and the dazzle remains the fact that President Carter must secure the necessary two-thirds majority of the U.S. Senate for this treaty to become operative. As one White House official said, the president cannot afford to be defeated on Panama. If he lost that one, what would happen to SALT, the Arab-Israeli peace talks, China? His entire credibility is on the line. The Hall of Nations is beginning to empty. Most of the guests will split one of two ways, either to a special dinner given by Secretary of State Vance or his opposite numbers, or back to the White House. The heads of state will be feted by President and Mrs. Carter, a black tie affair. So that concludes our coverage of this evening's most historic event, the signing of the Panama Canal Treaties at the Pan American Union Building, the headquarters of the Organization of American States. We thank you for sharing this moment of history with us. This is Dick Ross-A, and this has been a presentation of the News and Special Events Divisions of the Mutual Broadcasting System.
Wide Weekend of Sports takes you to the scene of sports action across the nation and around the world. It's all on Mutual, your network leader in news and sports.